Welcome to the first Real Talk of 2025, and I am so excited to have one of my friends, one of my fellow board members, and the esteemed educator, trainer, broker extraordinaire, Todd Bingham with Willow
Hey,
Real Estate with us today.
hey, Ashley. Hello, everybody. So happy to be on here talking about this wonderful, exciting topic we have coming up.
And if you don't know Todd, Todd has this amazing calming cadence about him and his voice, and that's why people love to watch his videos and take his classes. But what Todd is alluding to is 2025 or 2024 was such a fun year for all of us running brokerages, practicing real estate, being at the association, and of course, teaching the changes in classes. And so Todd, before we get into what these contract changes that came about, as well as some additional language and some of the addenda and those changes by TREC that went into effect January 3rd, let's kind of maybe do a recap as to why some of this stuff even had to happen, especially paragraph 12 around compensation and additional contributions. What happened in 2024?
Well, we had a settlement that sort of changed. Well, I don't want to say changed, but that defined some new rules that everyone
Okay.
has to follow. And yeah, they've sort of changed how some people are doing business. And they've added some requirements that we've all been adapting to ever since that settlement.
So that's what we did. It was like a lit stick of dynamite shoved up your rear for about 3 months, right? Teaching classes and trying to get out in the wild, trying to inform as many people that we could. The changes are here. The changes are here, and there were also some additional forms that Texas Realtors had produced to help us with some of those changes, because obviously we did see that the settlement went into effect nationally in August. We started the changes through, Netris and RMLS and Texas Realtors revising the forms in July. So it was a wild ride.
Was
But yeah, specifically around, just understanding how are we going to make sure, because we've even changed vernacular from commission to compensation, how we're going to get paid, where that looks like it obviously being removed from the MLS. And our contracts, it took a minute for TREC because it is a government agency and it does take time to get things passed through. And so we almost had to kind of band-aid things for a little bit while that settlement was in effect. And 2402 was already there, but they changed the name, and that's the compensation agreement between brokers. And then 2406 was the new form that Texas Realtors was great and nimble to produce to help us be able to articulate how we're going to get paid. Is that a good summation?
absolutely. Look, I think we are, I would say, blessed to have an amazing state association that I think acted so quickly
Yes.
and just got things put together so fast for all of us and for our benefit.
Yep.
In a time where some are questioning like the value of, these different trade associations and stuff, I think Texas Realtors really stepped up and just helped all of us. I think earlier than most other states. And so
Yep.
I'm thankful for that. Some of the things that we saw them implement are because whenever you look at most government agencies, they're sort of slow by design so that they're not
Yep.
ever too reactionary over some small thing and, make all these unneeded changes. And so, like, for instance, the 2406 was definitely a Band-Aid to get us to the point to where TREC was going to make their changes to the official contract.
Sure.
And so, yeah, they got us there for sure. And I'm thankful for that.
No, that's wonderful. You're not on like the dole for Texas Realtors or anything, because that was a great plug for them, man.
No, I'm not.
Okay, good. Just had to clarify. And we love, our state association from the standpoint of what they are able to do in those promulgated forms and help us put together task force and figure out what we need to do to remain nimble, and us as the local association representing that, being able to serve the masses, because whether it's Real Talk or it's one of our classes, a Zoom recording or anything else, it's our job to try to disseminate as much of that info. And Todd, thank you for being one of the ones that maybe sometimes took it on the chin to sit there and get out there. So now we have the pleasure of talking about the changes. We're just coming up on a month of that, but obviously it's a little bit different of a marketplace to where, not everybody has seen those changes implemented just yet in real time. So, I'm happy you could join us today, and let's go through. So first and foremost, I think it's great to talk about what those adopted changes are. And we're going to go ahead and put in a link to TREC's website where you can go and you can see everything that was physically changed. You can download the red line versions so you can see what was there, what has been modified, additional language maybe that was clarified on those documents, and that will really help you. We're not going to go over every single change today, but we are going to go over the ones that, I don't know, Todd, that I think are at least most important or most prevalent to the everyday residential realtor that is out there doing business right now. So what we're going to go over is paragraph 12. That's the burning paragraph that everybody is talking about, confused about, arguing about, and figuring out how to best represent their clients. We're also going to talk about as far as some of the other things, the third-party financing addendum. I think that was a great clarification that they've put on there that we're going to go into more detail. But for those of us that have some gray hair, and by the way, Todd, you look great with your gray hair. I just dye mine. But before, if a buyer didn't get approval per the terms of the third-party financing, addendum, they could just back out. There was no clarification as to what needed to be provided. So we're going to go into a little bit more detail there. We're also going to talk about some clarifying language in the addendum for backup contracts. I mean, I think that's a great one. And then something that we can just touch on is that pesky T47 that needed to be notarized to accompany a survey. Todd, are we required to do that going forward?
No. So look, you have a second option. The Texas Department of Insurance came out with an additional T47. I think it's the T47.1 is what we're calling it.
That is correct.
And yeah, and it's I think it's awesome. Now, the only issue I've run into with this is you don't have to notarize it, right? So that's a good thing. That's a positive thing. Because really, if say in the contract you've checked that you're going to deliver the survey or that the seller will deliver an existing survey, if you do that and you don't send over the T47 notarized, then you haven't actually checked off that box. And so this has always been a pain, I think, in a lot of listing agent side. And so, the T47.1 is great because there is no reason to notarize it. However, it does ask for a date of birth, and some people are very private about that. I think my own mother, if I asked her to fill that out and she had to write her date of birth, she'd rather go get it notarized, I think. So.
Todd, that's hysterical. I'm like fine with her. I'm about to turn 40 and I'm fine declaring that all over the place. But I think that's an interesting point that I didn't think of. But needless to say, I think options are fantastic, especially when we have sellers that are traveling, maybe not in the country. And, you used to be able to just like roll into the bank and get something notarized so easily. And it's just not as easy nowadays. So that's great. But all right, let's rip the Band-Aid off because it's the one that I think most people are having some heart palpitations over and really, arguing in the streets over paragraph 12. So can you give us maybe just a quick high-level summation over what the changes in paragraph 12 are in regards to compensation and seller contributions?
Sure, happy to. So paragraph 12 used to be reserved for specifically if the seller was going to be covering any kind of closing costs for the buyer. And it defined closing costs. It still does. It defines them in a certain order in which they must be paid, et cetera. But nowhere in there was anything about compensation prior to this January 3rd change or the mandatory change of January 3rd. And now TREC has taken this paragraph and reworked it to where we have a couple of different options. And one of those options for asking the seller to pay the buyer's brokerage directly is paragraph 12A-B. And whatever it is, you can ask that you just write it into the offer, into this paragraph 12. You can have the seller pay the buyer brokerage directly a percentage or a flat fee or whatever it is that you've negotiated. And that is actually part of the contract. So it sort of eliminated the need for anything like, say, the TXR 2406, which was sort of the stopgap or Band-Aid to get us to this point. Well, now we're here. And so we don't really need to use the 2406 whatsoever anymore because it's all covered in, well, not all, but a portion of it is covered in paragraph 12 now, thankfully.
So let's make sure people realize TXR 2406 has been sunsetted. So I'm assuming it's probably been taken out of all the forms libraries, but if you're someone who still has, likes to write wet contracts or wet forms or anything else like that, it is no longer in circulation. So the 2406 is gone, but we still have 2402, which is the agreement between brokers, the compensation agreement between brokers. Why would we still need that, Todd, if it added this additional language in paragraph 12?
Yeah, great question. So there's multiple ways to be paid in this profession. One of them is directly from the seller. Most commercial agents are seeing this. I feel like that's kind of how they live. But
Sure.
on the residential side, we see it both ways now. And I think we kind of always have, even prior to the settlement. There was a way to do this. But anyways, so 12A specifically, if it's in our contract, that means you are being paid directly by the seller. The buyer's brokerage, we could say buyer's agent, but we should all know that the agent doesn't ever receive compensation directly. It goes
Sure.
through the broker. Per TREC rule. But anyways, so the buyer's brokerage is, if you are using 12A1B, then that just means that the seller is paying that fee directly. Now, there is another way to get paid, and that's if you were to say, if a listing agent, whenever they are talking with their seller, I like to call it a pre-negotiated buyer agent compensation, whether it's a fee or a percentage or whatever. That's, we have a bunch of different models. But if we're doing it that way, and I've even heard a few different members, like John George Jr., the co-chair of the Broker Lawyer Committee, has referred to this model that I'm referring to now as the traditional model. But I think that we're going to see that sort of break up, and people are doing unique things. But anyways, if you're getting paid that way, straight through the listing brokerage, then you would use a totally different outside agreement. You'd use the 2402, which is not really even attached to the contract. That is a separate written agreement between the buyer brokerage and the listing brokerage. And still, in this case, it's the seller still paying it. It's just kind of like going through the listing brokerage first.
So let's talk about that. And so I hate to go pre-settlement, post-settlement, right? Because that's both PS and PS. So we can't use that, as initials. However, pre-settlement, we obviously had the unilateral offer of compensation in the MLS, which could be referenced at any point. And on page 10, for informational purposes only, it said, per the MLS, blah, 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 fill it in. And so that was also there for our lenders, for our title companies to reference. Now, page 10 is informational only, correct? That is not a binding portion on that.
Yeah, there's no way that, at least that I've ever heard of, somebody ever trying to get something written in that paragraph at the bottom of page 10 referring to compensation. I've never heard of that being enforced ever. In fact, it has now for quite some time said this is for informational purposes only. Yep. And so for those of you relying on the stuff on page 10 to somehow secure your compensation, you got to stop. You got to quit that, because this is high risk, and you might show up to the closing table with no compensation for all the work you just did.
And that's what I've heard. And I wanted to use that when I was talking pre-settlement and post-settlement, because we didn't have necessarily a document attached to the contract, or it's specified in the contract before, as to what the buyer's agent was being paid that was offered through the unilateral offer of compensation on the MLS. So that's why you had the informational piece, which was just, trust but verify, right? Let's make sure with our CDAs and everything else that is actually true and correct. But now, so if there is a 2402, which is the compensation agreement between brokers, and yes, I might stutter. These are a lot of names and a lot of numbers, but we're going to get it right, Todd. But if the listing broker has pre-negotiated the buyer's agent compensation to be paid for through that agreement by the seller, then you would put 2402 as a part of in your offer package to be sent over, or preemptively if you wanted to have 2402 signed off on before delivering the offer to the listing agent. And that is where it would be defined as to, hey, this is what we're offering, right? You can specify in there and have that mutually signed upon between the listing broker and the buyer broker. And then in page 10, for informational purposes only, which I think is a great reference point for those third-party vendors that are a part of processing the paperwork and everything else to at least reference, that's there. But you wouldn't do 12A1B, correct?
Correct, yeah. And that's where this is kind of confusing is if you have say if you're a buyer's agent or buyer's broker, you have your compensation written into the offer, not through 2402 or anything like that. But if you are using 12A1B for your compensation, then you leave that page 10 blank because that is specific to a separate written agreement.
Yep.
It still says on our contract, such as the MLS offer of compensation, but that's incorrect. We don't even have that, right?
No, it actually, they did change it. So
Oh,
the
they scratched. Okay,
language,
good.
we scratched it, and it says pursuant to a previous separate agreement,
Oh,
listing broker has agreed to pay other broker a fee of either a dollar amount or
got it.
percentage of the sales price. This disclosure is for informational purposes and does not change the previous agreement between brokers to pay or share a commission.
There you go.
Now, I think I'm going to put that on there. They probably should have said compensation. They didn't change that, Todd. So,
well, whatever.
but that's okay.
Yeah.
Whatever. I like your attitude. But you know what we're seeing is I think people are really antsy or just unnerved by everything, and they really, regardless of what's going on, they really feel inclined to use that 12A1B, regardless if the listing broker has already pre-negotiated that in the listing agreement or not. Now, if that happens, let's use that as an example. If there is, and the listing agent doesn't tell the buyer's agent, hey, I've actually got that specified in my listing agreement, so we need to do 2402, right?
Right.
If the listing agent does not do that, the buyer's agent then puts that in there. What say you to that?
Well, look, this isn't an either or thing. 12A1B is very specific. The beginning of it says that the seller shall pay the following expenses. So if you think about this, if you are the listing agent and you have something in the listing agreement where you've already pre-negotiated what the
Right.
buyer agent will receive, you might be double obligating. You might be saying within this offer that the seller has to pay them directly. The seller must pay the buyer's agent's brokerage directly.
Yep.
And then you're going to have to pay them potentially if you had a compensation agreement between brokers as well. So you need to be really, really careful here. There's two huge risks. One is you have to double pay, and it might even be more than whatever you charged. And so you'd walk away with a negative, outcome here in income. The other thing is, though, the other thing we have to be looking at on the buyer side is we want to make sure that we actually have our compensation secure. And so somewhere in here, we have to find a way to bridge this gap. And it's through hopefully listening to us have some talks here and then, getting some education on this. It's not that complicated, but in the middle of things, this can be a scary thing. If you just keep doing what you have been doing, keep running the race or whatever and going through all of this, but you don't know what to do whenever it comes to this, you could be working and doing all this stuff, showing all these homes and whatever for really no compensation at all. And again, on the same on the listing side, I heard somebody, I think Wayne Tim had said, oh gosh, sometimes agents are, what is it? It was, oh, I've got to go run this marathon. I don't have time to put my shoes on, something like
Yes.
that. Like you need to
Exactly.
take the time and put your shoes on whenever it comes to this, especially. Because if not, you might be running that marathon for literally nothing, or in fact,
Well,
maybe negative.
so my East Texas husband would call this a dumb butt tax. Now he
Oh yeah,
uses the A word instead of butt, and so it's a DAT in our household. You don't want to pay a DAT, right?
right.
Because you're being a goober. You're not being educated, and that's essentially what we're saying here is that there could be an unintended consequence by not filling out these forms appropriately. And so, yeah, Lisa, there is a way, and thank you, Bill, our host behind the scenes of letting us know. When we're done with this recording, it will be posted to the social channels that it has been live streamed. So you'll be able to sit there, and you might even be able to speed us up if we're talking too slow, Lisa. I like to listen at like 1.5 to 2.0 half the time.
Yeah,
So
me too. Yeah.
yeah, good luck with all of that. But I think that's really important because I think initially that's where a lot of the confusion is coming from. And again, what do we always say, Todd? Consult your broker because ultimately your broker is the one that's going to have to defend you and support you. And as far as processes and procedures, you need to make sure that you are following those within your broker's guidelines, and that's so incredibly important. So we are talking about not as much circumstantial or anything else, but we're really giving those pitfalls and those confusions right now that we've seen with just filling out these forms. And that double obligating piece, like that's really unnerving and scary from that, because and I don't think everyone would do it, Todd, but there were still the exception to the rule where somebody realizes, getting to the end of the transaction, that ultimately they know what they did, or they figured it out, and now here we are at a standstill, and we've got two clients that are unfortunately put in a precarious position because we didn't have, you know, the most informed, I'm not going to say educated, but the most informed agents on both sides that were sitting there and advocating for their client's interest.
Yeah, it's a scary thing for sure, and that's another reason to involve your broker in this kind of stuff and make sure that you're following whatever their practices and their procedures are for you here, is because they're at stake too. I mean, ultimately, if you think
Yep.
about the law of agency, you're working for your broker, really, and your
Yes.
broker's kind of the
Yes.
client's agent. So, anyways, yeah, it's just brokers that are listening in, you need to make sure that you have some written stuff, I think, and some policies and procedures here as well.
Correct. Yeah, no, I think that's really important. So let's talk about the thing that you didn't want to talk about, but I'm going to do it in a very succinct way.
Okay.
Okay. So let's say there's the listing broker says, I've already got it predetermined in my listing agreement that we will be sharing cooperatively, and this is what we're offering. Great. That's not my full fee that I charge, though, Todd.
Okay.
So we can fill out the 2402, right, based on what's determined in that previously defined agreement on the listing agreement as to what the listing broker and the seller have agreed to pay per that agreement, right?
Right.
If there's still some money that my buyer representation agreement has not been made whole, right, by that 2402, can I put the remaining in 12A1B?
Look, you could, if we're going to try to ask the seller to pay that directly, that is, you do have that option. If the seller will not pay that directly to your buyer brokerage, then that's more of an agreement between you and your buyer, and it
Right.
almost has no place in the contract whatsoever.
Yep.
Any kind of gap there, the difference between maybe what your buyer has already agreed to pay you for your services and then what the listing agent or listing brokerage is offering,
Yep.
that gap, that whatever that portion is, whether it's a flat fee or percentage or whatever, does not have to show up in the contract.
Okay.
That's just between you and your buyer.
But if we are trying to further obligate the seller to do that based on our negotiation,
Right.
and that is something that the seller might consider, then that is where we could essentially put the gap. And I will not bind you, Todd Bingham, to that. And that is something
Okay.
that I would,
Thank you.
say consult your broker. But I think the other portion of that where you are completely correct is if you are using that 2402 and it is not fulfilling that buyer representation agreement based on that, then you already have a previously negotiated contract with your buyer to cover the remaining of your compensation that's not being covered within the confines of the contract, correct?
Correct. Yeah. And,
Okay.
I know there's a bunch of different listing or buyer representation agreements out there. There's not just
Yep.
the Texas Realtors one, but I use the Texas Realtors one because I think it's really well written. And I've noticed, or in that, right after the discussion of compensation happens, it's on the bottom of like page 2 in our buyer rep agreement. There is there's mention of who I can actually pursue for that payment. I think
Yep.
it's called the source of the compensation. And
Mm-hmm.
so you have permission from your buyer. And I know that if I were on the other end of this and I was just a consumer, I would, of course, want you to pursue that from everyone else possible before you're asking me for it. But if,
Sure.
say, everybody else says no and you're going to have to come back to me, then, of course, yeah, that agreement is between us and we can work it out however.
Decide to do it. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. No, I think that's great. I think we caught people like post lunch, where they're
Mm.
probably still recovering. So you're getting out off a little easy right now,
Good.
Todd,
Like it.
on the questions. But we can always circle back to that. But I think I think that's if we're gonna summarize, this is as best possible for those that are just now tuning in. The changes to paragraph 12, specifically A1B, is a great change. And it is specifying if there is not already a co-op broker fee that has been predetermined by a previous listing agreement. We now have something, and we don't have to use that TXR 2406 that band-aided things together and added some clarification. So 2406 is sunsetted. Essentially, we added some additional language in paragraph 12 to allow for that to be sunsetted and for us to specify if there isn't a previous listing agreement that is providing the buyer broker compensation. But we are not going, that is not to be double dipped. If there is a listing agreement that has already pre-negotiated the buyer broker compensation, then you are to use 2402, which is the compensation agreement between brokers. Is that correct?
It is. And can I just touch on this for a second? And this
Yes,
is a
please.
weird hang up that I have, but in the listing agreement, and I'm talking mainly to you, if not you, Ashley, but you, if you are a listing agent or listing broker, whenever you sign this agreement and say you do pre-negotiate something for the buyer agent, whatever that is, like I said, flat fee or percentage or whatever you're doing, if you're paying in horses or whatever, I don't know. But if you do pre-negotiate,
I take horses right now, Todd. I might take horses.
I would. That'd be kind of cool. I mean, well, alive. That would be my requirement. Anyways, so look, if you've already pre-negotiated that with the seller, this is not up for negotiation. This is, and anyways, not trying to go off here, but you have an obligation to treat all parties honestly and fairly, and that includes party representatives. And if they inquire, in my opinion, this is something that comes up. This is something to think about. Is a lot of people are saying, well, it's negotiable whenever it's not. In their listing agreement, they have a specific number there. And I'm talking about only if in the listing agreement, you pre-negotiate whatever the buyer agent is receiving, or the buyer agent's brokerage is what we should be saying. You need to be honest about whatever that number is.
Disclose it. Yeah.
Anyhow, whatever.
No, and I, you know what? Thank you for putting that there and talking about that, because there was also a really great podcast that James Dwiggins and Keith did with, and it's the real estate insight. I'm going to butcher it. Anyways, and our legal counsel was on it, and they did part 1 and part 2, and it was absolutely amazing. And I've been seeing it shared, and I love their podcast. Anyways, they do an amazing job, but there's what you can do, what you should do, and what the spirit of the settlement is driving you to do. And so I think there are some people, though, that feel like, don't get distracted, Todd, not yet. We'll go there. I promise.
Okay.
What I think people are holding back in disclosing that, or wanting to, because they do know that the buyer's agent is predefining what they charge in some sort of written agreement with their buyer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's some listing agents that are going, but I want them to send it, because if we're willing to offer more and they're charging less, I don't want them to amend anything, right? I don't want them to amend their agreement or do that. And so you can amend. Amending is amending, right? So you can physically amend an agreement. Now, NAR stance is you shouldn't go up. That's not the spirit of the settlement. Now, I say stance, but that is discussed in the podcast, and we've heard this. So can you, as far as physically in a document, amend the agreement? Well, at least for the Texas Realtors Buyers Representation Agreement. Is there an amendment to that?
There absolutely is. Yeah. I mean, you can amend almost any, well, not almost. That agreement is between your broker and the listing or the seller. Or if you're on the buyer side, that agreement is between your broker and the buyer. I mean, you're involved as well if you're an agent, but you can amend any of it. That's different than practicing law. Whenever we talk about practicing law, we're talking about representing someone else and, making changes to a contract in which they are the party to. But that's where the uniqueness of our listing agreements and buyer rep agreements come into play, is depending on your brokerage policy, you have some skin in the game. You're not just a representative. You are an actual party to that agreement. Yes. So you can amend almost all of it.
Yeah, you can. And I think that's the difference. And that's why I say what you can do, should do, what the spirit of the settlement is. I mean, we still don't have pure clarity in what that is, which is why it is so important to consult and defer to your broker's policy on whether or not they will allow you to amend up, amend down, whatever that agreement is based on that. And I think we need to, again, take ourselves out of the equation. And if we're doing something because we're trying to protect our own interest, and subsequently that can create a negative position for our client, we're not upholding, our fiduciary to our client in doing so. So yes, Todd, if it is in your listing agreement, disclose it, people. Catherine, that's what she was getting to. If the listing agent will not disclose the BAC agreed in their listing agreement, can we ask them to view the listing agreement? I've run into agents saying BAC will be considered with offer, but they will not confirm what their listing agreement states. What say you, Todd?
Wow. Well, Catherine, thanks for being here. That is a good question. Look, part of this is there has to be some integrity, right? Like doing the
Yes.
right thing, even whenever no one maybe sees what you're doing. And according to our code of ethics, according to our TREC canons, people need to be honest. They need to be listing agents included need to be honest, and they need to be answering this question honestly. Does that give you the right ever to ask for the listing agreement? I mean, you can ask all you want, I'm sure, but there is no way
I'm not giving it to you.
I'm not giving it to you. Just same with the buyer. I will give one other outside party my agreement, and that's if the MLS asks for them. If Kathy Faulkner or, if somebody from the MLS, of course, then, because you're kind of obligated to. Outside of that, though, I'm not interested. And that's a private agreement between me and my consumer. So, or my client, really.
Catherine, if they're not going to disclose that, then you really don't have an option other than to put it in 12A1B. And at that point, if there is something specified in the listing agreement, then that listing agent has now duly obligated their seller to pay that, if that's how they agree on it. So ultimately, for you as the buyer's agent, and Todd, correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, if they're not going to tell you whether or not there's anything in the listing agreement, then I'm reverting to 12A1B until they tell me otherwise.
No, I'd agree with that practice. I think it makes sense.
Yeah.
But we just all have to be very, very careful with this. For sure, there's just so much risk. But not like as a buyer agent, you're not going to work for zero. Maybe you are, I don't know. But in this case, it doesn't sound like many of us would want to. And so you need to secure your compensation in some form or fashion,
Sure.
whatever you enter in 12A1B is like the final form of your contract is one thing, right? But if we're talking about how, presenting an offer and I want my compensation to be noted, and the listing agreement or the listing agent won't tell me if they did pre-negotiate or not anything for the buyer side, then I'm putting it in 12A1B for sure.
And then at that point, Catherine, if they say, well, it's already specified in the listing agreement that there's I'm sharing cooperatively with the buyer's agent, then a 2402 should be circulated for a compensation agreement between brokers at that point. And then obviously that can be stricken from the actual offer that's presented. But Catherine, I know we are seeing that, and that's what Todd was talking about as well. And so we all need to do better. Let's do better. What I would advise is to not get adversarial, and that I think is what we are seeing out there in this wild, wild west of real estate right now. Is people want to stand firm in their laurels and get adversarial with each other, and ultimately we still have to figure out the straightest path, the straightest line to do what's best for the client we're representing. And if the other side, if the other cooperating, party is not cooperating as well, you still got to figure out what the straightest way to get to your goal is. And I don't know that is getting adversarial, which is unfortunately what I am seeing agents do. So Lisa has another great question. What if the seller wants to offer less to a buyer's agent because the offer is too low? And I'm assuming that means they pre-negotiated in the listing agreement, just like they did their sales price. Their listing price. They have predetermined what they're willing to offer, up front to a buyer broker that is bringing a ready, willing, and able buyer. But now that buyer broker has sent over an offer that just does not look great. And so the seller doesn't want to honor that compensation that they agreed to within the listing agreement. Todd, what do you do there?
Well, since you're never going to see the listing agreement anyways, if you're on the buyer rep side, this is it's a hard battle, right? And this is, in my opinion, where negotiation and your skill as an agent,
Mhm.
this is where it really comes into play. Hopefully you've had some education on this and you've talked with your broker and other people in your office about this kind of stuff. There's an amazing designation that you can get called the Renee, and it's the real estate negotiation expert. It's one of my favorite courses. It's super hands-on, and you will learn some things on how do I negotiate both with other agents in my profession, and how do I, at this point, you'd kind of be negotiating directly with the seller, sort of through the agent. Um, all terms are negotiable, right? And so this is something where you're going to have to work on your skill set to, if you want
Now,
to.
I think Lisa might be flipping the other side. What if she's the listing agent
Mm,
and you get an offer and maybe the buyer's agent didn't circulate a 2402,
right.
preemptively, right? And or one was signed preemptively and now they get the offer and oh my gosh, that is way too low. We're not, we might be willing to negotiate the sales price a little bit, or maybe we're willing to take that sales price, but I'm not giving you the contributions and the compensation at the same time. Does the seller have the right to amend what they're going to pay to that agent?
It's a good question. Solid question. In my opinion, yes, they do. They can, if like I said, I think all things are negotiable, especially prior to an executed contract, right? I
Sure.
mean, if this whole thing is executed and signed, then obviously that's different, right? But things are negotiable here. I know what I feel like there's a whole lot of value in buyers agents,
Yep.
and even on the listing agent side, I am thankful for buyers agents because they help get us to the closing table because they
Mhm.
have some incentive to do so. And so I am not planting. This sounds too salesy. I don't mean it salesy, but I am talking to my sellers early on about the importance of having someone potentially representing the other side. Mainly because I feel like, kind of vital in this entire process, and it gets us to the closing table, and it actually helps accomplish what the seller wants, which is to sell their property. So, I think if you're waiting till this moment to maybe even talk about why somebody else having representation is a good thing, then you're not going to win on this one. But something that I would recommend maybe considering, and that's something that I like to do, is to talk to the seller about, hey, buyers agents, even though obviously, we don't want to pay them, or however you're going to break that down, whether you have them negotiate for their pay or whatever, before the offer's made, or, in the middle of the process, I don't care about that. But we need to be educating our sellers that buyers agents are important. They're the ones that are pushing that buyer to get pre-approved and to go through
Yep.
all these steps and to follow the timeline and stuff like that. And they may say, well, Todd, why can't you do this as our listing agent? Why can't you do this? And obviously different brokers are going to have different policies on this. But, if you ever look at really what we don't have dual agency in Texas, for one thing. But if you
Right.
look at what intermediary actually means, I don't know that anyone, if they actually knew what it did, or what it meant, I don't know that anyone would actually do it. And I
Yep.
mean, even on the consumer side, whatsoever, because really you have to kind of bite your tongue and keep all opinions to yourself whenever you go intermediary, especially
Ooh, that's
without
hard for
notice.
me, Todd.
Do what?
Yeah, that's hard for me. I said that's hard for me.
Oh yeah, well, yeah.
Okay.
Look, I just don't do it. It is a policy for us. If we're going to do intermediary without appointments or whatever, or if I have an
Yeah.
agent that wants to do that, I'm out. I'm not interested. I think there is no representation whenever you do that. So, anyways, I think it's important to have a buyer's agent, and I think it's important for you as a listing agent to be telling your sellers a little bit of it. Like, hey,
No,
especially early on, this is important
no,
to sell your house.
and I would absolutely agree. And Lisa, if you've already, if the seller is obligated and only obligated because they signed a 2402, prior to the compensation agreement between brokers that states a certain amount of money or percentage or anything else, and now because the seller actually sees the offer and goes, well, I'm not doing all of it. Then the easiest part is to not change the compensation. The easy part is to negotiate the price or negotiate the contributions that they've also asked for. Because ultimately, most sellers, unlike the one that I'm dealing with now as a buyer's agent, which they're standing principled on the buyer's agent compensation, so it has nothing to do with net. Um,
Hmm.
but that's the exception, not the rule. But most sellers are looking at their end net proceeds walking out the door, and so if they, you don't have to necessarily negotiate the compensation. You can, raise the price. You can reduce the contributions that are a part of that. There's options there, but that's the whole point. Until there is a binding executed contract and all of those things have been specified, things are up for negotiation. And nothing was signed. I mean, so if nothing's signed, then things are up for grabs. I mean, that's kind of what it comes down to. But I knew we would get that would be the bulk of today's talk. We spent 40 minutes on that. I would be again remiss if I didn't, for our audience. We've got the TREC link to the changes, but we're also going to put a link in there. Texas Realtors put a great how to use and document of paragraph 12 and breaking all of that out. And that's a 3-page PDF. So we're going to go ahead and stick that link in there, which we just did. And that is a great reference for anybody. Just a quick read on there for further explanation on that. Because Todd, I do want to talk about a couple of the other changes before I get you off of here. That third-party financing addendum. Have you seen some interesting stuff, over the years with people, backing out under that third-party financing provision, but not actually providing any documentation as to why?
Oh my goodness, yes. I mean, I've seen people essentially using it as an option period because, and I'm thankful for this change. I think it's an easily overlooked one.
Same.
But I think that TREC really did an awesome job. The broker lawyer committee and the people that put this together, I'm appreciative for them because this is a good change. Essentially, you would have the entire amount in paragraph 2A of the third-party financing addendum. For those of you that don't have it memorized, that's the buyer approval section. You would have however many days, a negotiable term. I have seen a lot of 14 and 21s in that spot, but it's wherever, right? We negotiate on that. Where they would wait that entire time and then just basically send over a termination that had a mention of 2A, and that's it. Like they were basically saying, hey, my buyer couldn't get approval. We're out. And they would get their earnest money back. And to me, that's a big problem because how do we know if they were being honest? How do we know if they even tried to proceed with any kind of financing, or are they just using this? Maybe they had a couple other under contract and they wanted to see which one they liked better. I know that was going on a couple of years ago. So yeah, this is an awesome change. I'm thankful for it.
Yeah, and that's what it is. And so now in paragraph 2A, it's been changed to require both a notice of termination and a copy of a written statement of the lender's determination. And like in paragraph 2B, which was referencing property approval, right? I mean, so if it didn't appraise, or if there was something related to the property not being able to be approved, that was specific. Well, now we have taken similar language and we've adopted that into the denial of being able to get a loan, which I think that clarification is great because, Todd, you and I both know you can go to different title companies and different title companies will make different determinations as to whether or not something is required. And ultimately, we do know this is a hot button for me. I still don't know why we have all these provisions, but then ultimately we still have a mutually signed upon release of two parties that are probably salty. And so we specify everything in a document and in these documents, but then ultimately everybody still has to agree to play ball of what the contract says. But at least we're getting further along, and it's specified on there. That a copy of a written statement from the letter setting forth the reasons for lender's determination under this provision. And so I think that is, that's a massive win. And now there's no up for interpretation.
Right. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's pretty clearly defined as to what that is. We've already touched on the T47, and we now have T47.1, which is the declaration instead of the affidavit, which is great. So unless you're Todd's mom, who does not want to give her birthday on that declaration, which you could still get a T47 notarized.
Right. Yeah,
there's options, and I think that's great. So another one that I wanted to talk about, was out of concern about the confusion and improper use of paragraph 11, which I don't know about you, Todd, but Sherry Fearbacher always cringes when she sees an offer come over and paragraph 11's got some additional language in it. But But now the addendum for the backup contract is modified to provide more clarity on the timing and payment of the earnest money and option fee by incorporating similar language from paragraph 5 of the contract and by addressing timing and payment of additional fees. So why did we need this?
Right. Well, look, another great change. And I know it may seem, in this current market, which I think is picking up, at least for what what I've seen with my agents,
Yeah,
it seems weird to be talking about backup offers, but I know there's still a need for it,
we're still
even right
there.
now,
Yeah.
but whatever, markets change and it could be crazy again anytime. So this is really needed because what we were seeing is people using the old backup addendum and sort of creating some special language and putting it in paragraph 11 for special provisions of our main contract, and just basically saying something along the lines of like, if and when we become the first place contract, we will deposit, or the buyer will deposit more option fee and more earnest, kind of these if then statements, which we should all understand to be practicing law essentially. And
Yep.
I don't know a single broker that wants any of their agents or broker associates practicing law whatsoever. I know TREC does not
No.
want it either. It's a huge portion of the complaints, by the way, that go to TREC, in fact. So anyways, yeah, they've cleaned this up to kind of include similar language in the new backup contract. So, or I'm sorry, backup addendum.
Yeah, no, and I think it's great. And I've got it right in front of me. And again, we've got that link to all the things that were changed on as far as from TREC. And so you guys can review that if you want to look at it further and be a nerd like Todd and I like to do. But this is what's really important is that and Todd, to your point, you said, if you look at the red line version, it looks like, oh my gosh, they made all of these changes to it, and they really didn't. What they did was created more connective tissue of almost some redundancy of what's already in paragraph 5 of the 1 to 4, and now they brought that language back in. I would almost say, maybe I'm feeling a little froggy. Hey, Goober, in case you didn't read the main contract or the contract that you actually signed, here's what that said, and we're going to bring it back into this backup contract addendum. But they did add that buyers shall deliver the earnest money and option fee as provided in paragraph 5 of the backup contract, and buyers shall deliver additional earnest money of blank and an additional option fee of blank to escrow agent within a certain amount of days after the amended effective date of the backup contract defined. So if you wanted to put a small amount, you could put a small amount, and then in your backup contract, you could do that and as additional earnest money and do that. But I think it also talks about what happens if you failure to timely deliver additional earnest money, failure to timely deliver additional option fee. What happens with all of that? And I think, Todd, there was just some confusion as to how to fill out and what happens. And so now I think we've done the KISS approach where we've made it a little more simple.
The big thing to remember with this, and with with the old version too, is the buyer never gets their they never get their option money back. So that's why I think there was some weird hesitation and why people were putting in all this weird verbiage in special provisions. And now this sort of addresses that. You can do a lower amount. I guess as a best practice, maybe do a lower amount. Of course, you want to do enough to entice the seller to even consider signing the backup, right? So this is where the negotiation happens. But do a lower number, and then what we're saying is, if we actually get a crack at this, then we'll bump these numbers up to higher real numbers, or whatever. Right?
Sure.
So, yeah, that's a good change for sure.
No, I think that's the whole point. And look, we don't know what the problems are until we get out there and we're starting to use these things. And I know some of these were kind of pent up demand. And so while they were making this big change to the 1 to 4, these were great additions that they were doing at the same time. And these aren't the only modifications that they made, just for time's sake and really looking at the ones that might be of immediate use to the masses. These were the ones that we really wanted to focus on today. Todd, we only have 10 minutes left, dude. Okay. I mean, come on. This torture for 50 minutes hasn't been that bad, right?
No, not at all. This is fun for me.
Okay, good. Well, we've got 10 minutes left. And so maybe I don't want to talk about anecdotally what were, bad practices or anything else, but what's it been like? I mean, you run a brokerage, you sponsor agents, you're a practicing agent yourself. what are some things that you can maybe at least throw out there? I know you're big on our code of ethics and our canon, our fiduciary, and all of those things. But is there anything that you want to kind of touch on or talk about here in the last few minutes?
Sure. Yeah, I've got a few bones to pick. I'm just kidding. It's
Let's do it.
no. Look, I think all of us. I think if you're the kind of person tuned in to this right now, you were kind of preaching to the choir. I feel like you
Yes.
may not necessarily need to know all this, but I don't know that many people other than some instructors, like Cindy and Candy Cook and all, some of my friends that really know this really, really well. And
Yep.
right now, more than I can't think of another time other than, our post settlement in that time frame, you need to know this stuff. Mainly to not double obligate your seller, but also to ensure that you can receive payment for the hard work that you're doing for your client.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
this is a time to, I think, where we need to sort of come together. And I do not mean collude in any way, but we're part of this awesome association locally. Metrotex is the best, and we have an awesome state association that is providing education for us. They're providing, like the sheet that Bill put in the chat. That's awesome. I mean, it literally walks
Yeah.
you through the best practices here. So we just really need to everybody needs to make sure that you're putting those shoes on and actually, getting the
Running the
education that you
marathon.
need here. Yeah, right,
Yeah.
right. Too busy running a
Running the
marathon to finish
marathon.
this one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, and I think that's so important, Todd, is that I think everybody was really hyper focused going into we had the announcement of the settlement last March. Can you believe that? We're
Crazy.
almost a year into that. So but we had the announcement of the settlement in I think that was early to mid March. And then we obviously had the changing of, if you use the promulgated forms from Texas Realtors, those revised forms, the 2406, the lucky band-aid, to the contract before TREC changed that, which again, if you're just tuning in, 2406 has been sunsetted because it is no longer needed. It is redundant to what TREC made those changes in paragraph 12. But that was your point in the beginning, was that we saw a problem. We're seeing, solutions, now that came from Texas Realtors. We're seeing the solutions from TREC, and it's not uniformed across the country. And you pointed that out too. I actually found, when I was looking before here, I was like, wonder if there's any other additional, cheat sheets or whatever else that we can add, that I was seeing out there. And one broker from Tennessee said, "Oh, great. Well, Texas is doing a good job. What say you, Tennessee?" And they were sharing a video about the changes that they were doing. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And I'm not trying to put Tennessee on blast. I'm pretty sure it was. But I think that, to your point, is all we want to do is grumble. All we want to do is highlight the things that didn't suffice our needs, personal needs, whatever else. But ultimately, it's really hard to figure out how to revise all of these things and provide the tools and the assets to our industry that is going to solve every single problem out there in the marketplace. Because ultimately, we've got a lot of people going into this mixing pot trying to get a deal done, and sometimes there are exceptions that we've got to deal with. But I too am very grateful, Todd, that with the settlement being announced in March, the revisions coming from Texas Realtors in July, that we were also able to stand up, because I think that they started getting circulated in June, right? Wasn't
Right.
it like the end of June?
Yep.
And you and the rest of your teammates of instructors, I did one or two, but you guys really wore the capes, and you said, you know what? My job right now, besides my main job, is to get here and make sure that we inform the masses and as many people as possible. And you and your other colleagues were sitting there on Zooms and recordings, and everything else in between, and doing in-person classes consistently. And I'm just so proud of all those efforts, because that makes this marketplace so much better for all of us, to make sure that we have the best, most informed agents. But I say all that to say is everybody was super hypersensitive during that time, right? I mean, everybody was drinking from the fire hose. Let's go, let's get informed. And now it's almost like the holidays hit and everybody went into a coma and came out. Nobody's concerned about being educated again. And I don't want a dramatic shift or change to happen necessarily to incentivize people to get informed. But sadly, there are a lot of people that have not sought out information or classes or anything else. And so, what are some good resources then, Todd? You've already talked about, a couple of designations, but what are some other good resources? If people aren't seeing this Real Talk or something else, where can they go to see where classes are, to stay informed and to be up to date on information?
Well, I would start with Metrotex's education site. That's my first. I think there's something so valuable about learning from someone in your marketplace. And
Yep.
if you are a member of, if you're lucky enough to be a member of Metrotex, then I would start there and try to find some in-person education. I know that doesn't work for everybody, but I
Yep.
think the value there is huge. If you can't do it in person, that's fine, whatever. Do something online, but I would start with Metrotex. Of course, the NAR has some pretty amazing resources for us to share with our actual consumers. Texas Realtors does as well. But yeah, we've got this pretty cool campus thing going on
That's
at,
so.
at
What is that,
Metrotech.
Todd? I'm so excited you just brought that up.
So we've got some on-demand classes for free at Metrotech, and this is just going to be growing and turning into I think something that nobody else is really offering, and it's exciting.
Yep.
Good place to kind of get your education up and learn about this stuff and a whole lot more. Um, let's see. Also, oh yeah, we just had the calendar for mymetrotex.com put up. That's going to have all of our events. To me, it is so valuable just to be around my competitors, and that may sound weird, but we're not colluding. We're not trying to fix anything, but you will learn from people around you. The people that attend the events that Metrotex has are some of I think, the best realtors and best representatives in this area. The people that are showing up there, and you will inevitably learn something from somebody else who's at an event. And so if I were you, if I were anyone looking to up my education and learn more about some best practices, I would be going to as many Metrotex events as possible.
Todd, I think you're absolutely right, and I know, we've, internally really made sure it's not about the status quo and doing the same things that we've been doing for 20 and 30 years as far as the types of education or disseminating information. I mean, heck, we're on a live stream right now in the middle of the day,
Right.
running that because we want to meet our members where they are, and I agree. I think it's, do all of it. Do a hybrid. That doesn't mean that you can't take online education, but make sure you're tuning in for an in-person class too, because that energy in the room, and you might hear somebody ask a question that you didn't even think of. And that leads you to being even additionally informed. And so, I'm really excited about that My Metrotex campus and getting through there, because that was another thing for us. I am not the one that's up at 2 o'clock in the morning trying to take continuing education, but I know plenty of my fellow cohorts that do. And part of that meeting our members where they are was not just to send them, to your point, to another exterior platform. We wanted to be able to have, trainers in our marketplace that were also going to be educating. Todd, you're on there. I'm on there too. We've got several others. And so, and it's complimentary to Metrotex members, and that's what people need to understand. I think it's 18 hours complimentary with your membership. And then we're excitingly going to be offering, I think, Legal 1 and 2 and broker responsibility under there too, which is absolutely insane to have those to be taken at any time. And we just posted a link to our campus. So if you are one of our members, you'll be able to log into that with your login credentials and tool around and see what's going on. But we're doing big things in response and not reaction, in response to where we know the market is going. And I'm proud of what we're doing. And I think we're still going to have some tricks up our sleeve in 2025, aren't we, Todd?
I think so. It seems like it. Yeah. Look,
Yeah.
I think we can't really skip over the fact that Metrotex has for sure gone through an amazing transformation, and I think it, just from the things that I know from the inside, which are probably very little of what's actually going to be happening, but it's there's a whole lot more coming, and I'm super excited
Yeah.
about it. I think it is it's my favorite association. It is my primary, and Ashley, you were the leader of it whenever this was all. I feel like this transformation was happening, and man, it just says a lot about you, and I'm thankful for your leadership and all of that. It's been awesome. You and Justin are fantastic.
Thank you. Well, we did not pay Todd to talk about me or Texas Realtors or anything else. He is here on his own volition. But Todd, you are a stand-up guy. You are one of the best in the business. And if you get a chance to, take one of Todd's classes, I promise you won't be disappointed. And Todd, thank you for your service on the board. And let's continue to do cool things together.
Cool. Sounds great. Thank you.
All right. We'll see you later, guys. Thanks for tuning in.
Bye-bye, y'all.